All right, so in this video, what I'd like to show you is how we can use our flat modeling techniques in Onshape to actually make a circular shape like this cylinder right here. So this is going to involve a couple of steps. I'm going to zoom back and show you what I'm going to end up with, basically, and then I'm going to talk you through kind of how I got there. So ultimately what I want is this cylinder, but I want to make it out of a single flat piece of cardboard. So the question is, like, kind of how do I do that? So I could chop this up into a bunch of tiny little rings that all get stacked on top of each other. But instead what I'm going to do is basically take this one cylinder, kind of unroll it to make one flat piece. I'm going to add some joinery so the ends of that piece can get kind of stuck together. And then when we eventually laser cut this, we will have to add a few things to the drawing that is used by the laser cutter so it knows to store the piece so that it becomes flexible and we can kind of wrap this thing around. So let me make a new part studio, and right away what I need to do is start off by sketching my cylinder. And so the way that I do this is going to be important. I'm going to sketch on my top plane, and I'm going to create a circle. So let's say that I want this cylinder, the cylinder's outside diameter to be 4 inches. Next thing I need to do is I need to make another circle inside that that basically acts as the inner wall of the cylinder. So I'm going to bring this out to whatever sort of arbitrary size. And now what I want to do is basically add a dimension between those two things. I want to be able to say specifically how far apart these two circles are, because that's going to be the thickness of my piece of cardboard. So I'm going to make myself a variable. I'm just going to call this cardboard. I'm going to say that it's 0.16 inches. And now we're going to see those two circles adjust. So that all looks good. Next, what I want to do is I want to actually extrude this up to create the cylinder. So I'm going to go ahead and select just that outer ring. And I'm actually going to make myself another variable just so that I don't have to kind of keep track of stuff quite so much. We'll say that this is my cylinder height. And let's say that we want it to be 4 inches tall. So we'll go ahead and click the check. And now I've got a 4-inch tall cylinder. So that all looks great. So I can use that in my model as the cylinder. But now what I want to do is think about how I'm going to make this on the actual laser cutter out of that single sort of flat piece of cardboard. So I'm going to make myself another sketch. I'll do this just on the top plane as well. And what I want to do is kind of think about unrolling this cylinder into the flat piece. So I know that ultimately it's going to become a rectangle with some features, and I'll add those in a second. Let me, instead of using my center point rectangle, let me use my regular rectangle here. And I'm just going to kind of draw this out, again, at an arbitrary size. So in other words, I'm not trying to get that rectangle exactly perfect right now, but now I do need to put in some dimensions to make it exactly the right size. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and say this is going to be the height of my cylinder. So I'll use that variable cylinder height that I made, and it's going to adjust it to 4 inches. So it's 4 inches tall, just like my cylinder, or it will be. But now I want to think about what the length of that is. And so here we have to go back a little bit to our geometry. So what we defined when we said that this outside circle was 4 inches was the diameter. But what we need to know now is what's the circumference of that circle. And the circumference is just 2 pi r. So what I can actually do in here in Onshape is I can say, well, I want this length of this thing once it's unrolled to be 2 times 3.14. We're just going to use that for pi. You can put more significant digits in if you want, 3.14159. I don't remember what the next digit is, something like that. And then, so that gives us 2, that gives us pi. What was the radius of our circle? Diameter was 4, what's the radius? Radius is also 2. Okay, so Onshape will take that whole thing, and it will spit out the correct calculation for us. So that is the circumference of that circle, kind of unwrapped as though it were a flat shape. That all looks good. And now I could go through and I can extrude this out the depth of my piece of cardboard there as well. So if all I wanted to do was just cut that flat piece and then fold it up, I could probably do this at this point. Again, I would have to take it into the software that we'll use to set up the drawing file to make those score lines so that it becomes flexible. But I'd like that thing to be able to be joined together so that it's not just kind of like flopping around once we kind of wrap the cylinder around there. So I'm going to add a little bit of joinery to the end of this. And this is maybe kind of useful to show some sketching techniques here as well. So I think what I'd like to do is add one of those dovetail or sort of puzzle joints to the end of this thing. And here's how I'm going to approach this. I'm going to say that I want to make one of those angled lines go off this way, and the flat part of it go out this way. Now I didn't place that very precisely, but that's okay, because here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make myself a construction line right at the midpoint, and I'm simply going to mirror this angled line over. Oh, whoops, I need to select my mirror line first. I'm going to click on my mirror line. I'm going to select this, and then it's going to just mirror that angled line over there. So that looks great. I'm going to get rid of this line because it was just kind of a placeholder. And now I'm going to actually complete that shape. So now it turns into a closed face. I also am going to use my dimension tool to set the distance between these points here. I think maybe like 0.25 would be good for this. Something like that. I think that works pretty well. I don't want it to be too big because I know that this is supposed to be circular, and a big flat dovetail is going to make it hard to kind of curve that whole thing around. So that looks great for the sort of positive end of this, but I'm going to be wrapping around itself, and it's got to kind of lock into the other end. So how do I get that sketch geometry over there? Well, the answer is I can select those couple lines, 1, 2, 3. I can copy those. So if I right-click, I can say Copy Sketch Entities. And now what I can do is I can paste those things in there. Now they're definitely not in the right spot, but I can use my tools to kind of line those things up. I'm going to drag this down some. And basically what I'm looking for is just to get this in exactly the same spot on this side compared to where it is on the other side. So let's see. Might have helped me out if I'd grabbed the other line there as well. I'm kind of eyeballing this right now. I think that's probably pretty close. Actually, let me redo this because that didn't work very well. Let's try that again. I'm going to undo pasting that. Looks like Onshape has taken a second to undo that change. Okay, let's redo that just with the... There we go. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one more line that goes between those things, and then I'm going to copy all 4 of those lines instead of just those 3. All right, so let's copy this, copy sketch entities, let's paste sketch entities, and now when I move this over, what you should see is that line at the end, hopefully, is going to start lighting up and connecting over there. And if it doesn't, that's okay. We can just leave those lines right there. Whoops, come on. Try that one last time. I think I need to, I had to click to set the line. That's what it was. All right, so let's just use a constraint to put those in place. So we know that we want this line to be coincident with this line. So that snaps those things together. That's great. And we know that we want the midpoint of that short line and the midpoint of this line here to be the same. And it looks like maybe those already are. So I think we're good there. And now it's already cut that away. Whoops. Sorry, we got to get rid of that. Get rid of that piece up there. I don't know why it was. I don't know why that was doing that. Let's get rid of. Okay. So it accidentally took a bite out of that. Let's get rid of that in my sketch. All right, there we go. So it correctly left the slot there, that dovetail slot, but what it didn't do was it did not extrude this part here for the positive piece. So there we go. So now I've got both halves of that. So this thing is basically ready to export for the laser cutter. And once we get those score lines in there, we should be able to wrap this thing around and basically just connect it together using those 2 ends.